All righty, A pushers. So here we go. Today we're going to talk about the American system, manifest destiny, and death. Ooh, kind of spooky. An American Whig horror story. Ho, ho, ho. All right, so let's get into it. Let's see what happens here. All right, so 1840, we're in 1840 now. 1840 is an election year. The current president, remember, he was Jackson's vice president, Martin Van Buren, is going to run for a second term. But over the last 4 years, he's had a lot of bad things come up that's going to affect him. So the economy has collapsed under him. Remember, we have this depression that we go into because Jackson vetoed the bank and he withdrew all the money and he deposited the money in banks that didn't exist. And so now the government doesn't have any money and the economy absolutely collapses under him. We're in a pretty bad depression. He's against expansion. Americans are beginning to move further and further and further and further west, out into the frontier, into the Louisiana Territory. And Van Buren's not in favor of this. He doesn't want to expand. He doesn't want to bring in more states or territories into the country, primarily because of the slavery issue. This is a continuous, ongoing issue, and he doesn't want to deal with it, right? Every time we bring in a new state, every time we bring in a new territory, the issue becomes, what about slavery? And it's a very divisive issue. Now, his thoughts about slavery are pretty clear. He thinks abolitionism is the greatest threat to the Union. He thinks abolitionism is going to destroy the country and lead us into a war. On the other side, the Whigs, who are the opposition party, Henry Clay, he's run for president a couple of times. He's lost, both times. So Henry Clay, who is the leader of the Whig Party, is going to learn from history. Americans love war heroes. George Washington, Andrew Jackson. So he's going to take a page from the Democrats, and he's going to nominate a war hero from the backwoods of the American frontier. He's going to nominate William Henry Harrison, who is a hero of the War of 1812. There's good old William Henry Harrison. Now, in an effort to win the South, which the Whigs have a really hard time attracting Southerners to the Whig Party, because the Whig Party is all about the American system and factories and industry, none of which the South has. They're going to nominate a former Democrat, somebody who used to be a Democrat, but apparently is no longer, and he's a Southerner. He's from the South. A guy by the name of John Tyler. So let's talk about the election. The election is a particularly brutal one. The election is a particularly interesting one. It's a very brutal campaign, as the two sides are going to sling a lot of mud and attack each other and say a lot of bad things about each other. The Democrats are going to attack Harrison because of his age. Harrison is fairly old for a presidential candidate. He's fairly old for anybody in the country at that time. He's in his 60s. And they're going to call Harrison Granny. They're going to refer to him as Granny and kind of make fun of him for his age. He's just an old, frail man. The Whigs are going to attack Van Buren as a very snobbish, a very kind of an effeminate elitist who they're going to spends taxpayer money to buy the finest silk clothing from France. And he has all this frilly clothes, and they talk about his dainty tapered fingers and just crazy things like that. And you can see there's a cartoon down here on the lower left-hand side of the screen that is a Whig political cartoon kind of poking fun at this very snobbish, very effeminate elitist, Van Buren. I don't know what he's doing in the second picture. I don't know. Apparently, his eyes are rolling back into his head. I don't know. Maybe he's possessed. The Whigs, the slogan for the Whigs campaign is Tippecanoe and Tyler too. I don't know, just kind of rolls off the tongue. It's fun. It's fun to say Tippecanoe and Tyler too. It sounds like something out of a Winnie the Pooh book. So what this refers to is William Henry Harrison's victory against some Native Americans in the present state of Michigan at the Battle of Tippecanoe, which was a fort up there in 1811. And, of course, their vice presidential candidate, John Tyler. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. And the Whigs come up with this entire imagery, this entire story about this campaign to show the stark differences between the two candidates here. They call this the hard cider and log cabin campaign. And you can see in the political cartoon above, it's again a Whig political cartoon. There is Harrison and Tyler written on the flag there. And there's a log cabin and there's some hard cider, which is, the alcoholic drink of the backwoods frontiersmen. And so they have this story that Harrison was born in a log cabin with a dirt floor and that he preferred hard cider over fine wine, again, showing himself as not this Washington elitist who's inside and he's not one of the wealthy elites in the country. He's one of you. He's this backwoodsman who grew up in this hard scrabble life and had to struggle and fight for everything. And he's just one of the regular guys. Harrison is actually born in a mansion, and he grew up very, very wealthy. Van Buren, by the way, was born in a bar in Tinderhook, New York. He was literally born in a bar, and he grew up dirt poor. So it's two very stark contrasts, right? The Whigs portrayed Van Buren as being born in wealth, born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He's never known a day of hard work in his life. And Tyler grew up in this very, very abstract, very hardcore poverty, log cabin, dirt floors. And in reality, it's the exact opposite. Van Buren's the one that grew up extremely poor. He was literally born in a barn. And Harrison grows up in extreme wealth and has never known anything but wealth. Well, so election day comes, bam! The Whigs win. Finally, Henry Clay has a president who's going to work with him on the American system and do what Henry Clay wants him to do. Henry Clay is overjoyed over this. Yes, finally, we can get some stuff done. So on Inauguration Day, when William Henry Harrison is going to be inaugurated as president, it's March 4th, 1841. And it's a very cold, very wet, very damp, very bitter day in Washington, D.C. It's a very, very cold, rainy day. So William Henry Harrison wants to prove that he's not this weak old man that the Democrats painted him as that he's still a tough, robust guy, right? He's a good soldier and he's tough, just like Andy Jackson. So he's going to give his speech without a coat. And it's a very long speech. It is, to that point, the longest inauguration speech in American history. And he does it in this very cold, damp weather. Oh. 1 month later, Harrison dies. Oh boy. And there he is on his deathbed. This is a real problem, a real problem. Harrison is the first president to die in office. We've never had this before. What do we do? So they roll out the Constitution. What does the Constitution say? Constitution doesn't really say anything about what happens if the president were to die. There's nothing in the Constitution about here's what happens if the president dies. So there's this a large conversation about what do we do about this situation. Do we have a new election? That was a serious consideration. Maybe we need to redo the election. Does someone else take over and finish this term? Do we bring in somebody else? Do we appoint a new president to finish Harrison's term, which is a month old? No one knows. Literally, nobody really knows what we do. Finally, Henry Clay and the rest of the Whigs and the Democrats come to an agreement. We can't have another election. We just had an election. And elections are hard, and elections are expensive, and elections are long. We can't do that again after just having done it just a few months ago. The Constitution does say that if the president cannot fulfill his duties as president, the vice president would take over. Now, it doesn't say anything about the president dying, but it just says if the president cannot fulfill his duties, then the vice president should take over. Well, the president can't fulfill his duties. He's dead. He's toes to Jesus. It's obvious he can't perform his job. So, John Tyler becomes president, vice president. John Tyler is now President John Tyler. And there's John Tyler. Now, here's a cool story about John Tyler. John Tyler has grandchildren living right now, today. Yes! Honest story. John Tyler has grandchildren. John Tyler becomes president in 1840. 1840. 180 years ago, and he's got grandchildren today. What? So here's the story. John Tyler has 9 children in total over his life. His last children are born in his 70s. He dies when he's 72. And his last children are born, his last 2 kids are born when he's in his late 60s and early 70s. Hooky smoky. That's in the 1860s. His children then continue to have children into their 70s. Holy cow. Which means his children are having his grandchildren well into the 20th century, well into the 1900s. So he still today has grandchildren. I think he has 2 grandchildren still alive today. One of his grandchildren just died last week. Mid-October of 2020, a grandchild of John Tyler's died. Whoa! Isn't that a crazy story? Oh, see, that's why history's so cool, y'all. All right, so Henry Clay believes John Tyler is a Whig. He left the Democratic Party. He doesn't like the Democratic Party, so he's certainly going to support Henry Clay. So Henry Clay begins passing all these bills for the American system and shipping them off to Tyler to sign. Tyler doesn't. Tyler informs Clay that even though he doesn't belong to the Democratic Party, he's still a Democrat, and he doesn't like the American system. Oh. And Tyler begins to veto all of Henry Clay's bills. Oh, this is crushing to Clay. Clay fought so hard to get a Whig in office. And he told William Henry Harrison, you just sign the bills that I send you and everything will be great. And Henry Clay thought he finally had an ally in the White House to help him with American system. And now he doesn't. Clay is furious, and he begins to call John Tyler the accidency and the accidental president. And for the next 4 years, literally nothing happens. Henry Clay passes bills, John Tyler vetoes bills. And John Tyler's entire policy is to oppose Henry Clay. So anything Henry Clay wants, John Tyler's against. Anything John Tyler wants, Henry Clay is against. And so for 4 years, nothing really takes place. Oh boy. So this brings us to 1844, which is an election year. The Whigs are going to kick John Tyler out of the party. Like, dude, you're not a Whig. I don't even know why you're here. You got to go. And they choose Henry Clay as their candidate, right? This is Henry Clay's year, 1844. Henry Clay is going to win. Henry Clay, what's he for? He's all about the American system, right? We've got to do the American system so the United States can be, will be, someday can be what they want to be. So he's all for the American system, and he's against expansion, because expansion is just investing money into expanding the country, which will take money away from the American system, right? The United States only has so much money available, and we can't be spreading it across the country. Think of it as like peanut butter. You have a big blob of peanut butter on a piece of bread. We have a lot of peanut butter in one spot, but you begin to spread that peanut butter out. Now that peanut butter becomes thinner and thinner and thinner. And that was Henry Clay's worry, that if we begin to expand, we only have so much money, and that money is going to be spread out across the country, which means we're never really going to develop this road system and canal system and railroads and everything connecting the country that exists then, because and so they have to go through 9 different votes at the Democratic convention. This is when the conventions actually chose who the candidate was. They go through 9 different votes before they finally get a winner. And the tiebreaker is that Andrew Jackson, Old Hickory, says this is who the candidate should be. His name is James K. Polk. And James K. Polk is known as Young Hickory. You can see it at the top of his banner there, Young Hickory, because he wants to be seen as Andy Jackson Jr. So what does James K. Polk believe in? Expansion. And that's it. Oh boy. So James K. Polk embraces manifest destiny. And manifest destiny is this belief that it is the destiny of American people to expand across the whole of the nation, from sea to shining sea. This is what God wants Americans to do, to go west and go all the way to the Pacific Ocean and dominate this landmass. Polk wants to bring in this new country of Texas, which we'll talk about next time. And he wants to bring in the Oregon country, which is in the northwestern part of the United States. His slogan is 5440 or fight. And you can see on the map, the 5440 degree parallel is right here, which is way up into present-day Canada. Now, this is owned by England. So it appears, by his slogan, 5440 or fight, go to the 5440 parallel or fight, it appears Henry Clay is willing to go to war with England for a 3rd time in 70 years in order to get what he wants. And Polk wants to annex Texas. And maybe more. Oh boy. All right, so here's the election. Polk wins. Ah! Henry Clay can't get a break. He just can't win. Oh, poor Henry Clay. Oh my God. And Polk is about to lead the United States into a war that's all about one thing. It's not about ideals like the American Revolution, and it's not about maintaining our freedom or independence like the War of 1812. This war is all about one thing: getting land. And this war is going to take place because of a new country, the Republic of Texas. Oof. And that's next time. All right, A pushers, we will talk to you later.